Hey everyone, Keto Comet. Welcome back to 31 Days of Ketoween. Today I'm coming to you from beautiful Oregon. I'm literally in the woods, so that's why I'm in my truck because I don't want to disturb the rest of the family that's in our RV. So, today we're going to start number one of a two-part series on the origins of Count Dracula. Now, Count Dracula originated with a novel written by the Irish writer Bram Stoker in 1897. Now, of course, a lot of it was written about Bram's own life because he grew up literally in the heart of the Irish potato famine, so there was a lot of poverty, so a lot of the misery and Gothic themes you see in that novel are the result of Bram Stoker's own life growing up. But where did he get the basis for his character of Count Dracula? Well, there are actually two main sources. Both come from the same area around the Carpathian Mountains. We're talking Hungary and we're talking Transylvania. And we're going to look at the two characters, the real life historical figures that led based on Bram Stoker's own writings and his research, along with the other vampire folklore that was already out there, led to these two historical figures actually becoming literally the bloodline of Count Dracula. So I thought you would enjoy this. It fits right in with 31 Days of Ketoween. So let's get into it. The origins of Count Dracula. First, to better understand both of these historical figures, we need to take a look at the time and area in which they lived. Both of these lived in the 1400s and then later in the late 15 to early 1600s. So these very much a time around the Dark Ages, maybe going into the Renaissance around 1600 in Europe, but they lived in extreme Eastern Europe. We're talking about they were on the buffer zone of where Europe becomes the Middle East and Asia. So this is the area we're talking about around the Carpathian Mountains that are associated with present-day Hungary and Romania. So around those Carpathian Mountains, particularly the area of Transylvania, which was a small city-state within that area. And one of these is actually a member of the royal family, which we'll talk about, of the Kingdom of Wallachia, which was a city-state associated with Austria-Hungary and Romania. So let's take a look. Here you see on this map the Kingdom of Hungary, Moldavia, which no longer exists in its present form. We're talking about this is where the Serbians and that area is, Bosnia, all that all that good stuff. And here is Hungary, Moldavia. Down here you have the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire was a Turkish empire that rose up after the Roman Empire fell and took over a large portion of the Middle East and made their way to Europe. So they were right up on the cusp of Europe, and they were wanting to bring the the religion of Islam to the entire world. So they were literally backing up on Europe's doorstep. And you had this, what we call a buffer zone, which included the the sovereign state of Wallachia, of which one of our characters was a member of the royal family. And then just behind Wallachia, you had Hungary, which is the origins of our second person in the origins of Count Dracula. This was kind of a lawless time. You had kings deposed and risen up quite often. You had a lot of torture, a lot of prison, a lot of disease. This was truly a dark time, especially if you lived in this area because you lived, especially if you were a Christian, because this area was a mixture of Roman Catholicism here in Hungary and Moldavia. And then in here, in kind of what I call the buffer zone, you had Greek Orthodox Christianity, and then of course you had the Ottoman Empire here with Islam. So you had a great war of religions going on in this area. This area was kind of a buffer zone and a contact point for the overshoot of the Crusades, which were taking place during this time. So there was a lot of war, a lot of mistrust, a lot of take but not give back kind of attitude, and all of that led up to the origins of the two people that we're about to talk about. So let's get in to part one of the origins of Count Dracula with our first historical person. All right, I'm sure you've already guessed our first person, probably the one most associated with Count Dracula, was Vlad III Dracula, or Vlad the Impaler, as he's more commonly known. And I heard he won the Halloween yard decoration contest many, many years in a row during his lifetime. But he was born in 1428, somewhere between 1428 to 1431 in the sovereign Romanian state of Wallachia. He was the third son of Vlad II Dracula, or Dracul, Vlad II. Let's just call him Vlad II. He was his third son. He had two older brothers and one younger brother who we will talk about. But the origins of Vlad's mother is kind of speculative. Many believe because Vlad II had many, many concubines, many, many lovers, many, many wives from all accounts. We don't really know who Vlad's Vlad the Impaler's mother was. So I'm sure that played into, there was some mommy issues going on there. I'm sure that played into a little bit of his psychosis over the years. But he was born in a very privileged way to the ruling family of Wallachia. This is before Romania was a established unified nation. So all these little city states, you had Wallachia, you had Transylvania, you had Moldavia, then you had Hungary. You had all of these states that were kind of sovereign on their own. And he was born to the ruling family of Wallachia in 1428 to 1431. We're just going to put it right there. Now, Vlad II, his father, was a member of the Order of the Dragon, which was an organization created by the Greek Orthodox Church to basically keep Islam from spreading into Greek Orthodox states. So it was kind of akin to the Knights Templar, though a totally different sect. Knights Templar was more associated with Roman Catholicism, but this is more Greek Orthodox. But it was something similar. These were people that were sworn to defend Greek Orthodox religion and to keep Islam out of their country. And Vlad too was a member of this, and as a result, he got his other name, Vlad Dracul, which means Vlad the Dragon. And as a result, Vlad the Impaler, Vlad III, the subject of our talk here, was called Vlad Dracula, which literally translates to son of dragon. Vlad, the son of dragon. As I said before, very, very violent time to be alive. You had the Ottomans bearing down with Islam on all of these Christian nations. You had the barons and the noblemen and the kings of these nations warring with each other. You had strife between not only Islam and Christianity, but within Christianity, you had different warring sects. You had Greek Orthodox versus Roman Catholicism versus Protestantism, because this is after Henry VIII and all of his shenanigans. So you had Lutheranism, you had all this stuff kind of battling out. So people didn't really know who to trust, and it was into all of this the young Vlad was born. Vlad's father, Vlad II, was actually invited by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Mehmed II, to come visit his court. Now, the reason for this being that there had been musings that the king of Hungary and Vlad II, who was king of Wallachia, were going to join up to kind of help push back the Ottoman Empire. So as a result, and the Vlads had a huge, huge history of being a warlike family that had defended their little nation to many, many oppressors over the years, and Mehmet II knew this, so he invited uh, Vlad II and his two young sons, Vlad III and Radu, who we'll learn a little bit about later, to come to court to kind of talk things over. Unfortunately, they were all taken prisoner once they got there. And basically, Vlad II was pressed into swearing allegiance to Mehmed, or the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, and then to keep him loyal, he was forced to leave Vlad III and Radu in the court of the Sultan as a bargaining chip, and he was allowed to go back to Wallachia. And he reasoned that if they died in the service of their country, this was okay because he was prepared to do that, and his children should be prepared to do that. So they were kind of an okay form of collateral damage in Vlad II's eyes. So Vlad II was sent back to rule in a little more pleasing way to the Sultan and to help even bring the Sultan into power there while he held his two sons hostage. While in the grasp of the Ottoman Empire, it was said that both Vlad III and Radu were subjected to physical torture right up to sexual torture or sexual assault, sexual molestation, because sadly it was kind of a tradition in the Ottoman court to kind of initiate young boys and young girls into the ways of the world. Now, this is not my preferences. I'm not putting this out there saying it's okay, but I'm saying that it was done in the Ottoman court that way. And so Vlad and Radu probably were subjected to quite a bit of shenanigans, if you know what I'm saying. These were young boys; they were maybe 8 or 9 years old, so wasn't very pleasant for them. And as a result, Vlad got more obstinate. He developed a huge hate for the Ottomans and a hate for the Islamic religion, which seemed to all tie in. I'm not saying that it was allowed in the religion, but that's the way he took it. While Radu was a little more submissive and kind of just gave up in a way and accepted his fate. And as a result, Radu kind of fell into favor with the Sultan. And actually, both boys were educated there. They were educated in history, religion, science, astronomy, all all great things. They were highly educated while at the court, so that was an advantage of being there. It's just the other advantage was the disadvantage was the abuse that they suffered. Okay, so the two grew up in the court of Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire. Radu kind of assimilated while Vlad II remained a tad bit obstinate. This all happened to the boys around 1442. So for about 5 years, there was a tenacious peace between Wallachia and the Ottoman Empire. And then in 1447, John Hunyadi, who was by all accounts the king of Hungary at that time, decided to invade Wallachia with the Hungarian forces and take over the throne, which he did. And in the meantime, during that war, he killed both Vlad II, Vlad the Impaler's father, and his eldest brother, Mircea, who was not only killed, but before he was killed, he was tortured in a very heinous way by impaling and having his eyes gouged out. So Vlad saw from afar what happened to his oldest brother, and John Hunyadi of Hungary actually installed Vlad's cousin, Vladislav II, as interim king of Wallachia at that time. Well, of course, as you can imagine, Vlad wanted to take his birthright. So he actually, with an army and the blessing of the Sultan, actually rode in to Wallachia and started a war with his cousin for control of the throne. Vlad succeeded in driving out Vladislav and taking over the throne. This was a 1 month reign. During a 1 month reign, he managed to um, try to unify the area by purging out Roman Catholics and Saxons, which were basically white Anglo-Saxons from more Western Europe that had come there. He started purging them out in very heinous ways, which we'll talk about. But Vladislav was able to rally with the Hungarians at this time and wage a secondary war against Vlad, again, forcing him out a month later. And then Vlad went back to the Ottoman Empire, asked for help, which the Sultan gave, and came back and again waged war against his cousin for control of Wallachia, which he won, and this time killed Vladislav in battle, officially taking the throne in 1456. And then a more heinous purge of the Saxons and the Roman Catholics began because, as you remember, Vlad was Greek Orthodox. Even though his brother Radu had converted to Islam, he never did. He never fully embraced it. So he steadily began purging out any religion that was not his own. And this is how he got his nickname, the Impaler. Impaling is the act of killing someone by inserting their body over a wooden or metal stake in a very slow, painful method. Now, I was kind of surprised when I was doing research because I honestly thought he was killing these people and then just impaling their bodies after death as kind of a warning, but no, impaling was the actual mode of execution. Basically, what would happen, they would trim down and grease up a stake of some sort, and it would be inserted into already existing orifices in the person that they were torturing, namely Saxons and Roman Catholics. A lot of priests were killed during this time. They were actually they would take the stakes and insert them into either the rectum or vaginal opening of a woman. They would then hoist them up, stake them into the ground, and let nature take its course. And basically, what would happen, the person would begin to convulse and shake as the stake moved ever further into their body until their complete circulatory system shut down and they died. So it was a very painful, drawn out way to die, and it was extremely messy and extremely stinky, for lack of a better word. They said that Wallachia actually stunk during the second reign of Vlad the Impaler because of the amount of people that he executed in this manner. He seemed to get off on it. There were reports of him back in the Ottoman Empire torturing mice and birds in this fashion, and it just seemed to mill over into humans. A lot of people believe because he was probably sexually molested as a child that the way that using impaling as a way of murdering other people kind of gave him a way of taking back the control that had been taken from him as a child. Like I said, this is in the 1400s, so this is all just as close to historical speculation as you can possibly get, but I still think it warranted saying that it was probably a way of him trying to take back control. Vlad made a party of it. There were many times he would raid a village, a Roman Catholic village or a Saxon village, and literally impale everyone there and then sit down and have a meal watching them as they died. There is even some rumors that a servant of his, during one of these parties, became overcome with sickness from the smell and began to heave. Vlad thought that was a sign of weakness, so he decided he would help the servant by getting him out of the mess and had him impaled on a stake twice as high as the other stake so that he was up in the air and the smell did not reach him. Thanks, Vlad. Appreciate that. Vlad was an equal opportunity executioner. He executed men, women, and children. If he murdered an entire family only to find a small child that had been left, he would immediately have that child killed too, because in his opinion, children, though adorable now, will be an enemy that may try to kill you in the future. He was married twice in his life. His first wife is unknown. His second wife didn't live long because she lied to him, along with another concubine, lied to him about being pregnant, and when he had her examined to see if she was telling the truth, found out that she had lied to him, he had her killed as well. He also had many lovers. One of these is the woman that was rumored to have killed herself when the Turks. If you've ever seen the movie, the Francis Ford Coppola version of Bram Stoker's Dracula, the woman that kills herself in the very beginning, that's based on one of his concubines that was said to have seen the Ottomans coming toward the end and decided that she would rather give herself to the wolves than to the Ottomans and threw herself over the balcony. So that's all based on a concubine, not an actual wife. So all throughout his reign, he continued to purge, and then Mehmed II decided he wanted some payback for helping Vlad secure the throne of Wallachia. And he actually sent emissaries to Vlad asking for tribute, for him to pay tribute to the Ottomans. While there, it is said that his two messengers were asked by Vlad to remove their turbans. In the Turkish court, it was not a thing to do to ever remove your turban in public, so they politely declined, saying it was against their code to remove their turbans. And Vlad appeased them by having them seized and having their turbans nailed to the top of their head so they could never take them off again, and then sent their bodies back to the Sultan. There was a tenacious peace, as you can imagine, between the Sultan and Vlad from 1460 to 1462 until finally Mehmed had had enough, and he actually sent an army into Wallachia led by uh, Vlad's younger brother Radu in 1462 to take the throne and install Radu as king, which would have just have been a puppet government for the Ottomans. During this time, Vlad adopted a scorched earth policy while fighting the Ottomans. He would destroy everything in sight to prevent the Ottomans from using resources. He poisoned whales, he killed livestock, he burned vegetation, burned crops, burned houses. Basically, when Radu was marching in, he saw nothing but destruction. It was a mental game, and it was also a way of preventing them from being able to feed and water their armies. Also, he would send people infected by the plague into Ottoman camps, making lots of them sick. So it was not pleasant to fight Vlad. He was a master of early biological warfare and intimidation for sure. Uh, while in battle, Vlad and some of his men snuck in to the Ottoman camp and thought they saw the tent of the Sultan himself and said, if we can kill the Sultan or capture the Sultan, this is over. So later on, when they attacked the camp, they went back to that same tent. However, they had made a mistake. It was not the Sultan's tent, it was the tent of an Islamic holy man. So they killed him out of anger, of course, but realized that their whole thing of capturing and ending the war in one fair swoop would not be done. It was during this time when the Ottomans were marching toward Vlad's capital in the Carpathian Mountains that Vlad decided he needed to intimidate them as much as possible. So he created an impaled forest, which was basically not only Turks that had been killed and impaled, but also his own countrymen. That from the many he had killed during his purge, he also continued to kill people during this war because everybody was collateral damage and just something to be used for sport and for his own gains. He basically created a forest of impaled bodies, 100 into the thousands, that when the Ottoman army approached, of course, it got their attention, and Mehmed II was actually asked to come to the head of the army to see what they were seeing, and when he saw it, he is said to have said, any man that can do this is a man I can't defeat. So he was said to have pulled back at that time, that the intimidation worked. The fighting continued for a while, and eventually Radu was installed as a puppet king of Wallachia. During this time, a new royal family, John Hyundai, had died, so a new royal family rose to prominence in Wallachia old enemy of Hungary. Uh, you had two families. You had the king, Marcus Corvinus, and his cousin, Stephen Bathory, who is the great-great-grandfather of the next person who was a source for Count Dracula, joined forces to help reinstate Vlad the Impaler as king of Wallachia. Because remember, Wallachia was literally the only thing standing between Hungary and the rest of Europe and the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman expansion. So they needed Vlad. They needed that crazy killer in power to protect Hungary and the rest of Europe. Because at this time, Marcus Corvinus and Stephen Bathory were launching what would become to be known as the Fourth Crusade to try to take back Jerusalem, and the Ottomans were the main source of their of the fodder there. So there was a lot of warring going back and forth. And as the Ottomans now had a puppet king in Radu in Wallachia, they had inched ever closer to taking over Europe. So they needed Vlad. Vlad had been exiled to Hungary after his defeat at the hands of his brother. He was put into prison there, again torturing mice and birds with his favorite method of execution, impaling. And eventually he seemed to kind of step in line. He gave up Greek Orthodoxy, became a Roman Catholic, ironically, because Hungary was a Roman Catholic country. He became engaged to one of Marcus Corvinus's cousins, and he let him out of prison, gave him an estate, and eventually came back to him to proposition him to, with a joint Hungarian Wallachian force, to go in and retake the throne of Wallachia, which he did and was reinstated for his third reign sometime in 1470. And from that time, there was a huge amount of war and conflict between the Ottomans, the Hungarians, and the Wallachians. Lots of battles were fought, and eventually Vlad was killed in battle around January 10th, 1477. The Ottomans immediately tore his body into more than 5 pieces, from what I'm told, and had his head encased in honey and sent back to Mehmed's court to show that indeed the dreaded impaler and the defender of Wallachia was dead. The rest of his body was placed in a unknown place of burial. Some say a monastery that he had actually built during his third reign. Um, there in Wallachia, and a popular rumor says that after 10 years after his death, the priests actually opened up the tomb to look at his body and it was gone. Thus, feeding in to the whole rumors that he was indeed a creature of the night and not a real person. That's the story of Vlad the Impaler, Bad Dracula, son of dragon, which is where Bram Stoker, after much painstaking research, actually got the family name for the famous vampire. And actually, in the 1920 revival picture starring Bela Lugosi, he actually is commented, as well as in the book, saying that he's descended from the Vlad royal family of Wallachia, which included Transylvania. So there is your namesake for Dracula. But where did Bram Stoker get the idea for all the blood drinking? Because even though Vlad was a famous impaler of men, he's only been noted to ingested blood one time when it's rumored, it was never proven that he dipped a piece of bread in a victim's blood and ate it. We don't know, but that was not a regular occurrence with Vlad. He just killed people and that was it. So he was definitely the namesake and the brutality figure for Count Dracula. But where did they get the whole bloodlust from? Well, that will be from part two, the lady in part two, who is a descendant of Stephen Bathory, who helped Vlad take the throne for the third time of Hungary. His great great granddaughter will be the source for that material. And we'll get into that in our next episode of Keto Wing. Remember, ketosis, y'all. Hope y'all enjoyed this. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Keto Comic out.